Thank you for welcoming us onto your headphones. I'm Eddie.
And I'm Alex, reviewing Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt December Sky. And this is the rollback.
And that was a mouthful.
Yeah, let me get into this plot summary here. We can definitely break down this name, because there's actually a somewhat good reason why it is the way it is. So here's what we're talking about. Across a sci-fi space backdrop, a civil war rages between the Earth Federation and the Principality of Zeon, which is just made up of rebellious Earth colonies. They're the Confederacy in space. Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt December Sky focuses on one battle in this war over a colony that's named Side 4 More. As the fight continues on, both sides grow more desperate for victory, with the Zeon deploying disabled soldiers and the Federation using child recruits. Each side also deploys a special mobile suit, a type of giant mech, and each of them are controlled by their respective best pilots. E.O. Fleming on the Federation side, and Daryl Lorenz on the Zeon side. These two develop a rivalry throughout the movie. The Federation and Zeon, facing heavy casualties, eventually fight a climactic battle, ending in a stalemate and setting up a sequel. So,
goddamn, folks. If that's not broken down, of a side story that gets broken down, I don't know what is.
It's a very, very small part of the whole story. Anyone who knows Gundam, and I'm not one of those people, by the way, so this is me researching just a bunch. Gundam has, 40 plus years of lore to deal with. This movie covers just a very, very small chunk of that. And let me get into this name, because Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt December Sky is definitely a mouthful.
That's an anime name. That's a straight up, I can't think of an anime or of anything that has that long of a name in a film.
Oh, I'm sure that we could come across something. And keep in mind, this movie does have a sequel, so that might be a contender. But So Mobile Suit Gundam, that's the franchise name. Have to have it, right? But then there was the show, Thunderbolt. Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt. Reasonable. Still somewhat anime-ish, but okay. But what they did was they took that first season of a show, condensed it down into about 65 minutes, and then they named it Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt December Sky. Now, as to whether that was a great idea or not, we can kind of discuss.
No.
Agreed. No. And that's our discussion. Thank you for
joining us. This was the rollback. I've been Eddie.
And I've been really confused by this movie. Now, I think that I tried to break it down in the plot summary as much as I could, but I want to ask you, Eddie, you've seen this movie. Would you have gotten a lot of those details?
Hell no. I think this film heavily depends on, if you're watching it, you're probably already a heavy fan of the lore. Like, it's not I guess the equivalent that I can say is this, and fortunately, I've learned a lot of my storytelling skills from WWE, and one of the things that they do before every big match, before any big title fight or whatever, they always have a recap video that's 3 minutes long to some really good music that tells a condensed version of okay, here's why these two are fighting. So-and-so beat up so-and-so's wife. So-and-so beat up so-and-so's father-in-law's. Home invasion, square dancing contest, pro wrestling match.
Which makes a lot of sense.
But this has no prelude to it at all. There's no hey, here's the setup. All it is hey, these, there's a sniper battle in space. Go!
Exactly. The movie starts off exactly in that way. You see a bunch of carnage, no idea what caused it, and then it gets on to one of the mobile suits on the Zeon side, what's called a Zaku. And if you've ever seen those green with the purple-eyed, really bulbous kind of things, that's what a Zaku is. Now, we are kind of told this in flashback, but we're never given that sort of exposition. It's all very visual, this movie. And on the description of it, there was a little synopsis, but the main issue is the information is not in the movie. To get all of this, I had to, watch the movie multiple times. I mean, I think I might have seen it 5 or 6.
So sorry for that. I'm so sorry.
Well, and the other issue to it is that this is a really short movie. I understand that when you're taking a TV show where you've got a lot more room to kind of breathe and include more detail, and you condense it down into a movie, you're going to lose something. But this, I don't believe, had to be condensed this much. I mean, this is not even feature length, technically. You could have easily, added 5 more minutes and had a little bit of an explanation. Made it so that characters weren't doing the same thing in every scene, right? Give them a little variety. You could have added a lot more. There was no need to cut this much. I think that's kind of my major issue.
Fair. I think, anytime you recut, because here's the thing, writing for a film versus a TV show, clearly there are more challenges writing for a film, but there's also, I guess, a lot more openness when writing for a TV show. You have the time. It's like, hey, we don't have to explore this character, in 2 hours. We have an entire season to work with, and so on and so forth. So when you're taking those scenes that have already been filmed, or in this case, already been animated, audio that's already been dubbed, you only have that to work with. You don't have unlimited cuts. You can't edit writing. You can't go back and reshoot footage or redraw stuff. It's literally, hey, here's the bank that you've got to work with. Make it work.
Exactly. And I think that kind of throughout the movie, there was the feeling that they were doing maybe the greatest hits. I think the movie's definitely chock full of action. And I think that a lot of those action sequences are the strong points of the movie. So I think that they were kind of taking the high points as far as character notes and your fight sequences and cramming them all in. But when everything is that sort of saturated, it can get really repetitive. Take, for instance, the captain, Claudia, of the Federation forces. If you recall, she was the blonde captain.
Did she annoy you as much as she annoyed me?
She did. And that's the thing. I haven't seen Thunderbolt the show, but I can only imagine that in every scene of that show, she's not, sobbing and breaking down and pouring out her feelings to whoever's close by. I think what happened, I suspect, that in editing, they left out kind of, more low-key scenes, maybe scenes where she's competent at her job, and they just included, the most affecting parts in the movie. But what they didn't realize is that when you do that, it basically just makes her a weak character. All she does is, cry in the film.
Was it a suicide attempt or drug overdose? Like when she attempts to, I don't know if it was a suicide attempt or not, or a drug overdose, or what the hell, what was she doing?
Yeah, so at one point, after a battle, has gone poorly, as it does for both sides in the movie always, E.O. Fleming, who's their ace pilot, and was also very close to her because they knew each other from before the war, he finds her in her quarters, and she's injected herself with some version of morphine or heroin. It's a syringe. I'm not sure whether we're supposed to think that she's just numbing the pain but intending to live, or if she's actually trying to kill herself. Gun to my head, I would think that she's trying to commit suicide, because when she talks to Fleming, she says that she understands how his father felt back on the colony when he killed himself, and she also tells him that he was responsible for the deaths of citizens. And if that seems melodramatic, it definitely is. Jeremy Lee, or Lee, perhaps it's pronounced, Jeremy Lee is definitely overacting here. She doesn't have that great of material to work with, though. And all of the movie's exposition is delivered like that. It's all very preachy. It's all very high-strung emotionally.
I just realized something. If you go to the episode list on Wikipedia, the release days in between these episodes for this anime are months and months apart. They put a lot of production value into this.
Sure, which is why I don't think that this was just carelessness. Like we've both said, Gundam has an extremely deep lore. They do pay attention to story. I just think that a lot was lost in translation, making the show into a movie. I'm sure that, if you watch the show, Captain Claudia has like a great arc, and Jeremy Lee has, subtle moments to kind of counteract the screaming and the crying. which is a lot of the scenes that she's in this movie. But here, all of that is lost.
Question: what did you think of Fleming and the Jazz King? Like, what did you think of him as a character?
So he is definitely a one-note character. Fleming is sort of just a berserker. He feels alive when he's in the suit. At several points, he says that he feels free. He kind of loses his mind almost when he's given his special suit, the Gundam, where the whole series gets its title from. He laughs kind of maniacally. And I'd really like to talk about the rivalry that he and his counterpart, Daryl Lorenz, have. Because from the beginning, they meet each other as Lorenz and his group are sniping Fleming and his. They've taken out basically everyone in the group until Fleming is able to steal one of their suits and take away their sniper locations. What did you think about Lorenz versus Fleming?
I think their rivalry was, obviously it's the core of the film, but I think it could have been the saving grace of the film. Spoiler alert here, I didn't like the film. And I didn't like it not only because, to me at least, it wasn't very good as far as, like, the animation's great. Like, let's be clear. The animation and the fight scenes are amazing. But the story lacks. And if you have a bad story, you have a bad film, period. The story could have been great, though, if it had just centered around these two. Ground the entire film around these two rivalry. Forget all the side plots, forget all that. Just make it about these two characters. You build them up to damn near legendary proportions. Apparently Fleming is an ace pilot. He's a prodigy. Daryl Lorenz, his side gets so desperate that he ends up
amputating his arm.
He doesn't volunteer for it though. It's ordered, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So essentially, what happens in that part is that the whole movie is kind of attack and react on both sides. So to start with, Lorenz and his group are sniping the Federation, and because no one knows where they are, they're able to do that without any issue whatsoever, until E.O. Fleming gets their locations. Then they get wiped out. At that point, E.O. also gets the Gundam. He's faster than any suit on the battlefield. He's able to kill them with impunity. Zeon feels really pressured at that point, so Daryl has lost 3 of his limbs, and they're developing a new sort of a system that's extremely reactive because it's hooked up to your nerves, but it won't work unless his whole body is involved. So he's ordered to cut off his 4th limb. He does that. He pilots his own suit, which is called the Psycho Zaku, which main difference is it's red and purple. And the two of them, Fleming and Lorenz, fight it out.
Did you like their rivalry? I genuinely enjoyed it. I felt like there was genuine hatred there between the two of them. But genuinely, I thought if the film was just grounded in their rivalry between the two of them, the film would have been so much better off. Forget all the side stuff. Let's simplify it because you only have those 2 real elements to work with. And then obviously the supporting cast. The supporting cast isn't the best.
Exactly. I think that we can agree that the film has its protagonists in the suits. Whenever it's focusing around them, it's pretty good. Otherwise, it does kind of feel like a waste. You have, obviously, the scenes with Captain Claudia, which are just really overwrought and melodramatic. And then on the other side, on the Zeon side, Daryl Lorenz has his own kind of romantic interest in Dr. Carla. So Dr. Carla starts off the movie with having lost her lover. One of the people that is killed in Lorenz's squad by Fleming was her romantic interest prior. So her and Lorenz kind of get closer, and most of it is fine. It's just kind of passable. It's more or less forgettable through the movie.
What was your issue with her at the end?
So before the very last battle, they kind of get together all at once. There's been tension throughout the movie. The two embrace. They promise each other that they'll survive this fight. However, and this, I'm sure, is a result of an episode's worth of material being cut, she immediately, as soon as he leaves, demands to stay on a ship that's about to explode. She gets into a gunner pod and gets her fellow gunner killed because she's firing at the most dangerous suit on the battlefield. She tries to kill the Gundam and gets her mates killed for her troubles. And then, when that doesn't work, she makes a suicide bomb. So in the space of about 5 minutes, she's, crying with renewed hope for the future, and then she's trying to kill herself and take everyone with her, which is just atrocious writing. Exactly. And her actor, Tara Sands, voices her, and she's good. I just think that she's very poorly served by this writing. As far as the rivalry goes between the two, I think that you could have cut the cast of characters by a lot. I think that you could have removed almost all of their scenes and just had it be E.O. Fleming, this brash, arrogant guy, versus Daryl Lorenz, who's quieter. Now, what did you think about Fleming's character? Were you rooting for him?
I was genuinely rooting for Lorenzo, but I liked Fleming's. It's, the whole smooth jazz. You hear the jazz, it's already too late. As bad as that sounds, I'll take the good where I can find in this film. And yes,
it's Lorenz.
No, wasn't Fleming the one with the jazz?
No. You said Lorenzo.
No, I said I like Lorenzo.
His name is not Lorenzo.
See, that's how forgettable these characters are. I like Lorenz. Am I pronouncing it correctly now?
Yes. Well, not even pronouncing it correctly. You're saying the right name.
I like Lorenz. I do. I like his character. I like Fleming's character. I like how brash and arrogant, Fleming is. I like Lorenz's stoicness. Is it fair to call it that? Quiet. His what?
I'd say so. He's definitely more reserved.
Oh, but I like that, though. I like, a quiet person that, you don't want to mess with me. Like, I'm the wrong guy to fight with. I'm small, but I promise you I'm going to win. And that just means when he gets angry, when it heats up, when he starts really getting emotional and reactive, there's a little more weight to it. It's, this movie just suffers so much. And maybe this whole anime, this whole manga suffers from bad writing because they didn't understand. Work with the two best pieces that you've got and go from there.
And it may be that in the show, these side characters have more to offer, but in the movie, they're definitely a detriment. I completely agree. I think that the audience's sympathies lie more with Lorenz in this movie, just because, he's a double amputee by the start of it, quadruple amputee by the end of it, and he's also, just like you mentioned, he's not arrogant. He's not bragging as much as Fleming. But what I thought was interesting is that whenever the two of them intersect, Lorenz's attitude changes. He becomes kind of more of that angry person. He's more cocky. He says that he's going to shoot the smirk off of his face at one point. I think it's interesting to view the film as kind of Lorenz being brought down to Fleming's level, because Fleming does not change. He starts off like, I'm the best pilot, this really cocky, smug guy. He ends the movie on that same note. He doesn't change at all. If one character has an arc in the whole film, it's Lorenz, and it's about him being corrupted.
Did you see the sequel? You mentioned that there was a sequel. Have you seen it?
I haven't, no. They took it off of YouTube.
Maybe it's worth watching the sequel just to see if his whole arc pays off in the end. I would actually be willing to watch that sequel if they do justice to the characters. What other issues did you find with the film besides the supporting cast? I mean, did you find anything wrong with the animation? Do you think that there are too many plot holes with the writing? I mean, what did you think?
Yeah, as far as the sequel goes, I agree. Maybe they will take Lorenz's character and further his arc, maybe even give Fleming an arc so it's not just him being developed. But I think you have to ask yourself, is what I'm seeing in this movie enough to encourage me to watch a sequel? I've seen 65 minutes of what they've done with this show. Do I even want more of that? So as far as other issues with the film, I think that not necessarily plot holes, just not explaining why people are doing things. I would say that Carla's characterization in the last part of the movie is definitely a plot hole, given that a switch seems to flip in her brain and she's acting completely differently. Other than that, I think that the actions more or less make sense, but the movie doesn't explain why they're being taken. You have to kind of do your own research outside of the movie which I think is a failing on the part of the film. In addition, I don't appreciate that December Sky really uses shorthand a lot. Claudia, when talking to Fleming, her whole position is summed up with one line: I have to stop loving you, then I'll be able to order you to your death. Which, it sounded so artificial, so stiff, that it felt like you were watching a soap opera in that moment.
Did you feel like the what's the right phrase for it? The cliche lines. Like, I mean, you felt it too, right? Like, whenever someone would say something like that, it felt very anime. And that's not a knock. That's just like an observation. Like, for someone to see something like that.
Well, I would say that for me, because I did see that, when I see something like that, it is a knock. Because, anime does not have to have writing like this. There are, anime that are very well written, that don't rely on cliches like that. You mentioned E.O. Fleming and his whole war cry based on jazz, saying, when you hear free jazz, it'll be the last thing you ever hear, or that means I'm coming for you. That sounds like it would be something an action figure would say when you hit its button. There's no depth to him, and he's a one-note, one-dimensional character, but hearing lines like those definitely degrades the quality of the movie for me.
But do you think they're just trying to... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I think that you almost have to just, turn off your brain to everything that's not Mobile Suit related.
But do you think the whole point of Fleming's character is to be a good foil to Lorenz? Almost like maybe they weren't necessarily thinking, hey, Fleming needs to be a real fleshed out, deep character. Maybe the whole thought process was, hey, this is all about Lorenz, but we need to show the kind of monster that he isn't.
I would agree. I think that in general, the movie has, a war is hell motif. Gundam as a whole has anti-war motifs. They very much believe that, war is kind of where you see humanity at its lowest. But I think that in proving their point, they become so dark that it almost loses its shock value, where one side is using, disabled soldiers and the other side is using children, and both of them are being sacrificed meaninglessly. It gets to the point, at least in my opinion, where you think no military in the real world would act that way because they'd end up losing almost immediately. It's evil for evil's sake at some point. And I understand they're trying to further their motif, but there are realistic ways to do that. The great war movies, they show that there are reasons behind the horror. And, those are bad reasons, sure, but it makes sense and that kind of grounds it, in my opinion. So yes, I definitely believe that the filmmakers are trying to show Lorenz here as, initially someone who's reserved, who, had a family life back home, him being turned into kind of a war beast like Fleming. But I also think at the same time, this goes back to your point, there's not that much focus given to it. It could have been developed a lot more.
Well, I already said my improvements. I think the best way to improve this film would have been to just concentrate on those two characters, take your two best pieces, and then build everything else around them, make them the center. In your estimation, best way to improve it would have just been improving the writing, or...
Definitely improving the writing. Adding more to the story, even with regard to its length. I believe that with all the time that a season of the show gives you, you could have made this, a feature length by adding 5 more minutes. I think even with 5 minutes, you could have done a lot. Imagine if this movie was 90 minutes. The rivalry to be the center of the movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you want more attention on it. It's what's working. I also wanted to ask, what did you think, because you mentioned the jazz that Fleming has this obsession with, what did you think of the music in the film?
I guess after 1917, I guess I'm the music one, and I actually like the jazz. I found myself actually craving listening to it the next day on my way to work. I actually looked up a jazz channel on YouTube, and I started listening to it on my way to work. I thought it was I thought it was a nice little character, quirk. The thing is, liking jazz is not a character trait. It's just something that people like. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think they got
yeah,
that confused.
exactly. He doesn't have a personality because he likes jazz. But I thought, I mean, personally, I don't really like that sort of free form jazz. There's some jazz that I do, but not that type. I thought it really fit in with the scene though, where he's piloting his mobile suit. You know, he's dipping around debris and going through things. I think it works really well there. The other type of music is this more like country pop. That's more what Lorenz listens to. That's what plays in a lot of flashbacks. What did you think about that part of it?
I think that was just another way of them. That's one of the few smart things that they did throughout this film to kind of show the contrast between the two characters was the difference in music. You know, the smooth jazz, laid back, piano, light drums, light snare drum versus, you said yourself, the kind of pop country kind of vibe, the more uppity kind of way. A young, almost kind of innocent kid. That's something a young, innocent kid would listen to. But not Fleming. He's edgy. He listens to jazz because not everyone likes jazz. It's
Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it definitely shows you more about the two characters. The aesthetic in general, I thought was really cool because Gundam comes out in the 70s, is 79, I believe, was the original series. This takes place at around that same time, so they did an interesting thing where they kind of went back and gave it sort of a 70s appeal with the hairstyles.
You notice that too, right? Like the radio that they're holding, the hairstyles.
Yeah, Lorenz has an afro, right?
Yeah.
Um,
did you pick up on some of the lingo?
The lingo. See, I don't know necessarily how well the script translated from Japanese to English. This is not a problem that I have with all anime, but with some, you can kind of tell that English wasn't the first language that this was written in. It doesn't feel quite as natural. That's part of the issue that I take with the writing. Did you notice some slang there?
There was some, like Daddy-O, where are you at? Just little things here and there where it's like, oh, okay, they're trying to be hip. Good for them.
Right. And I think it definitely gives the 70s feel more. Because this is sort of the frustration I have with the movie. Some parts of it are really well done. So there's the cinematographer Kentaro Waki, and I think that how he stages the fights, I think that the animators and their work, and in including things like that, right, little details, I think that all of that was done really well. So a lot of care was put into certain parts of this movie, just not others.
There's a quote, and I might be misquoting. I think it was George Clooney that said this. You can make a bad film out of a good script, but you can never make a good film out of a bad script. And I think this film suffers from that intensely.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. I think there are a lot of good pieces here, but they're not coming together in quite the way that you want. This is definitely a movie where if you're able to kind of, turn off your brain, you're just looking for a quick action flick, this is probably pretty good. The fights between the Psycho Zaku and the Gundam, I thought were fairly impressive. What did you think of, their last fight when they're in that colony?
Honestly, the fight scenes are easily the highlight of this film, and that final fight scene, you gotta feel for the desperation, not only from the pilots, but from their Gundams, from these giant mech suits. You felt like they were desperate. At one point, it even says, like, I can't keep fighting unless I drop the armor. Fuck it, I'm desperate, drop the armor, and then you get the classic Gundam look. And I was wondering when I was going to see that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think, well, at that point, if I recall correctly, he's had half of his Gundam's face blown off. There's obviously only so much you can do with showing, like, gore in warfare when it's all mechanized, but I think they do a good job as far as that's concerned. And as to, you wondering when you were going to see that, I think that's almost part of the intention of the film. I think they wanted to kind of hold back on that iconic look by showing this really, like, geared up Gundam.
At this point, mate, I think I saw this film kind of broken up. Technically, I saw it twice. The first time I saw it, it was very broken up. Then I saw it one more time, like, in its entirety in one shot. And you saw it 6 times. What's your final verdict on this? Film, is it worth a rewatch? Would you recommend it to people? Do you think, are you never going to watch it again? Like, what final verdict on this one?
Well, I don't believe that I'll ever be watching it again. But then again, I've already seen it, 5 or 6 times. So
God bless your
maybe
soul.
I'm a bit Gundammed out, perhaps, with this particular movie. But I think that I came in expecting a good bit just because Gundam has this deep lore. And I found that I was really disappointed as far as the writing goes. The characterizations for a lot of people are, inconsistent. Fleming has that a little bit where people say that he doesn't really enjoy war, but then he's a laughing maniac every time he goes to war. Dr. Carla, of course, and her issues. I think that if you're able to just turn off your brain, enjoy a quick action movie, maybe even skip past the soap opera elements, then sure, it's worth a recommend. If you're wanting a coherent story, something that explains why people are doing things, and a good character study, then this is not the film for you.
You will be sorely disappointed at this. Mobile Suit Gundam. This does not live up to the legacy at all. What was your final grade on this one?
I gave this one a B-.
That's very generous, actually.
I gave it after lowered expectations, essentially.
Oh,
Because
okay.
even as an action movie, there's only 15 to 20 minutes of action in the whole thing.
That's true.
Yeah. Even just basing it on its utmost strengths, it has some issues.
At least we can both agree on that.
Mm-hmm. What was your final verdict?
I actually give it a C-. Yeah, I couldn't enjoy it mainly because I didn't understand what's the point of this war, why are they fighting. Even if I just take the two main characters at face value, there's only so much you can get from them. If you're listening to us on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe.
If you're listening to us via podcast, please subscribe. We'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. If you'd like to hear more about our thoughts on movies, go to therollback.net. I've been Alex.
And I've been Eddie, and this was The Rollback.